This task is for our writing and graphing linear equations unit. This is our launch or our task for finding slope or introduction to slope. Now we know historically students have learned a little bit about slope, but it's a great task to kind of get us back into that. Now I do want to mention first off that these visuals right here and the following visuals on the next page that I will go to are coming from a free resource provided by Math Giraffe. So if you go to the Math Giraffe website, you can access the free guide to teaching slope. Now this is going to run a little bit differently than our other tasks have. We still want you to put students into random groups, and you are going to have them sit together somewhere around the room. But the first and second part of this page are going to be done individually. We want students to take a look at these visuals and rank them in order of steepness, starting with the shape that is the least steep. They're going to list their order in these boxes. And then number 2 is actually just wanting students to think about why they placed them in the order they did, because that's going to help us out with number 3 when they have to kind of communicate their thinking to the rest of their group. So we want them to be thinking about it so that they're not wasting time. So after they've had a couple minutes and they list them in order, number 3 is where every person in your random group is taking a turn sharing the order that they placed them in, and then giving a brief explanation as to why. So each person has the option to either check, no, I'm sticking with my original ranking, or I'm changing my ranking to this. So they can change it based on thoughts and ideas coming from other members in the group. Now, after they have done this part, and sorry, I'm gonna have to scroll past part 2 because we will get to that next. So if we look at this, we have, you may now measure the staircases and ramps using the coordinate plane. Now, in our class, I actually projected this on our TV in the classroom, and I just blew it up real big so that I wasn't wasting copies and printing this part out, because you don't want this printed on the back side of the student page, because then the students will see it and that would interrupt the thought process and the discourse of what happened in the first part. So we want them to take a look, and we naturally want them to start kind of counting and talking about how did they get the order that they did, and how did they determine that something was more steep than something else. And so it is interesting to see where our students were at as far as building that discourse. And some of them were saying that maybe A was, a lot steeper than something like B, because they were thrown off by the fact that there were steps and they were kind of counting each individual one, or they tried counting the diagonal. So really it was interesting to see where their thoughts were at as far as how they were counting and how they were determining. Now, when we get to the point of students sharing out and asking students to share their order, keep in mind that some of these slopes are positive and some are negative. So be aware if you want them to take negative and positive into consideration, or if you just want to focus on the steepness as far as the actual just slope regardless of the sign. So if you ignore the slope being positive or negative and only look at the value, you are looking at this order. Now, A and D are the same value technically, so it really doesn't matter which one's first. But if you want to pay attention to the negatives versus the positives, then we're going to be looking at B, D, F, A, E, then C. All right, so we want to make sure and have students share out what they think their order is, give a little bit of an explanation on that. And so they need to have a little bit of a justification. And that could be, well, I see that F goes up by this many and then it runs by this many. So we do want them to have some conversations and some discourse around why they're choosing those measurements and what they actually counted to get their answers. So the next part that we can look at would be this. So this being student part 2, we are giving them a graph, a table, and 2 points. So in the activity that we just did, all right, they got to see those shapes on a coordinate plane. We want them to now look at a graph and see what information they could use to see if they could determine a way to find the slope. So we did it from the graph, but how could we use the information from the graph to help us determine if there is a way to get the slope from values in a table, or if there is a way to get the slope from just 2 points? Now, I will say that this task, aside from starting a little bit differently than others, this is meant to be a little bit of a longer task. Okay, the first part didn't really take very long. However, this portion is where we really want to get students an opportunity and give them time to see, is there a trend in the table? If there is a trend in the table, what is it? Can we recognize that trend on the graph, as well as the 2 points? And some of the students will just plot those 2 points and have that conversation of, can you explain where the connection lies? So you can go as in depth as you want, but it is important to give them the opportunity to have some conversations around this part, because they needed a little bit more time in our class recognizing the patterns and then trying to connect that pattern that they found in the table to the graph, or vice versa.